Hey everybody, welcome to another free tutorial video here on tylerduprey.com. Today we're going to be building a mobile navigation and menu for our website. It's going to be like a lot of the mobile navigations that you've seen on mobile apps and mobile versions of websites. And so this is going to be a long tutorial, or at least longer than the average tutorial, because there's a lot of steps to it, but we're going to end up with a really nice responsive mobile first navigation for our website by the end of this. And so I hope you guys like this tutorial, and let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to close my developer tools there. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is make sure that my viewport is narrow like a phone screen, because I want to design the mobile first version of this. And I don't know why, but in CodePen, sometimes I have issues with the body tag, and I want to make sure that there's no margin on that. I don't know why, but sometimes I get some weird vertical scroll bars when they shouldn't be there and things like that. So I'm going to set the body margin to 0. I'm going to set this div tag to be my background, and I'm going to give it the class page wrap because it's going to wrap everything in our page here. And I'm going to set the page wrap to take up 100% of the page with min height 100 viewport height. And then I'm going to set the background color to a light gray. So you can kind of see the light gray there. Alright, so I want to create a header element here, and this header element is going to hold all of the code for our menu and navigation. Inside of the header, I want to create a container. This container div is going to hold our elements from touching the left and right sides of the page, and so it gives them a little bit of breathing room on the left and right side. So let's do that. Let's build some basic container styles here. So we're going to set margin to 0 auto. So that's going to set the left and right margin to auto, which centers it on the page. Now we're going to set the width to 85% of the viewport width, and then we're going to set the the max width, and I can't type today, and the max width to 1260 pixels. So there we go. That way it'll never get too wide. Okay, so inside of our header, I actually want to break this up into 3 blocks using div tags here. And I want to give the first div tag a class of menu container, because it's going to hold our menu button. I want to give the second div tag a class of logo container, because it's going to hold our logo button. And I want to give the last one a class of, let's do search container, because it's a nice place to put like a search button. It's going to be in the top right, and you can put like a search button that users can click on and maybe go to a search page or something like that. Alright, so let's put in some text here just so we can see these elements a little better. So this is going to be our menu, and then in here is going to be our logo, which I'm going to make my website. I have a tutorial on my website where I actually show you how to turn this into a cool logo. I'm not going to do that here for the sake of time, but you guys can check that out. And then this is going to be our search button. Alright, so we can see our menu items there, and what we need to do is set the header styles up. I'm going to make the header have a background color of white. And I'm going to give it a box shadow that I've pre-selected here. I'm going to paste it in, and you guys can pause the video and copy that, or write your own box shadow. But I just like the way this box shadow pulls the header away from the page and kind of makes it look like it's sitting on top of the page there. Now I want this to be laid out in a row instead of on top of each other, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select specifically the header that's directly inside, or the container that's directly inside of the header. And I do that because I'm actually going to use the container a second time in this project, and I don't want to select that one. I want to make sure I'm selecting this one that's directly inside the header. And I want to display it as a flex container. And let's align items center. so that they're always centered vertically. And then back up here in header, let's add a padding top of one rim and a padding bottom of one rim. Alright, so that's starting to look good. I want to be able to see my menu and search containers better. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to temporarily put a border around them just so I can see them as I start to lay things out. And I'm going to put it around my logo container too. So let's do menu container, logo container, and search container. And let's give it a border of 1 pixel solid red. Alright, so now we can clearly see those. And I'm going to make my menu container and my search container. They're both buttons, so I'm going to give them the same width and height of 30 pixels. And then since our logo container is a flex box, or I should say a flex item inside of a flex box, we can actually give it the flex 1 style. And now it takes up the available space on the page and pushes our search button to the right where we want it and pushes our menu button to the left where we want it. Now we just need to add text align center, and now our logo is centered on the page. Now I'm going to remove these spans because we don't actually need them for the search and the menu anymore. And what we want to do now is start styling our menu. So here I'm going to remove search container and logo container from the border red rule and just keep the menu container because we want to focus on that. For our menu container, I'm actually going to use a label in here. This is going to be our menu button. And I'm going to give it the class menu. Inside of our label, I want to create 3 spans. And I'm just going to copy this one. So this is going to make up our hamburger menu, the 3 lines in our hamburger menu, and we're going to make that right now. So let's select the spans inside of the menu container. And let's say display block. Let's say width 25 pixels. Let's say height of 3 pixels. And let's give them a background color of this dark gray color that I like. There they are. They're all stacked on top of each other, but those are 3 individual lines. And what we want to do here is we actually want to select the second span with inth of type. And we want to say 2. And we can say margin top 1 rim for that, and not 1 rim, that's too much. Let's do 3 pixels to keep it consistent, and a margin bottom of 3 pixels as well. So that'll kind of separate our lines a little bit. And we want this menu to be centered on the page. So let's go to our menu container, and let's say display flex, flex, and justify content center. Let's see what that does. And that put it in the center horizontally, but we want to center it vertically as well. So there we go. So now it's centered on the page, and we can actually remove this border now. We don't need it. I do want to select my menu and do 2 things. I want to give it a cursor of pointer so that when the user puts their cursor over it, it turns into a pointer so they know that it's clickable. I also want to display it as block because it's an inline element that has block level elements in it, and I just want to make sure that that's a block. Probably not going to change anything. Okay, so this menu needs to, when it's clicked, it needs to slide a navigation out onto the page. And then when it's clicked again, that navigation is going to slide back off the page. And when it's clicked the first time, I want it to turn into an X, literally transform into an X. because that's going to tell the user that they can click it again to close the menu. And I'll show you what I mean by coding this up here. Let's grab the, and we haven't actually created what we need for this. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use what's called the checkbox hack, and we want to use a checkbox input. So we're going to do input type equals checkbox. We're going to say name equals menu trigger, and we're going to say ID equals menu trigger. And let's say class equals trigger, and that's a self-closing tag. And we don't actually need to see the trigger in order to use it. So under the container toward the top, I'm going to select the trigger and say display none. So any input with the class trigger, we know we can just display it as none because we don't need to actually see it to hold its check state. And so what's going to happen is this menu, which is now represented on the page as this hamburger menu, this label is going to, when it's clicked, it's going to check this input on and off. It's going to check and uncheck it. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say for. We're going to add a for attribute, and we're going to put in menu trigger. This for attribute needs to be identical to the ID in the checkbox that we want it to be for. Okay, so now when we click this label, it should be checking this checkbox on and off. And the way we'll know that it's doing that is, let's come down to the bottom of our CSS and let's grab the input. And let's use an attribute selector. Let's grab all inputs with the name menu trigger, which should just be the one. And let's style it when it's checked. That's what that's saying. And what we want to do is we want to get to the span tags and style those. And so what we need to do is we need to use a sibling selector, this plus sign, to go from the input to its next sibling, which is the menu container. So let's select that. And then inside of the main menu container is a span tag. And specifically, we want to style the second span tag right now. So that's how we do that. And we're going to give it an opacity of 0. We're going to give it a height of 0. We want it to completely disappear. And we're going to give it a margin of 0, so it doesn't hold any space at all when this checkbox is checked. So there you go. When the user clicks it, our middle span has completely disappeared, and these two spans have collapsed almost to where they're on top of each other, which is good because we can now start building our X shape. And so I'm going to copy this code and I'm going to paste it above. And I'm going to do that because I'm actually going to get rid of this code, and I'm going to say first child. And that's going to select the first span tag. And what I'm going to do is delete all that, and I'm going to say transform rotate. And we're going to rotate it 45 degrees. And so we've actually created the first cross in our X. And we've done that to the first span. Now we need to do something similar to the third span. I'm going to paste it below the second span. And I'm going to change this to say last child, which will get the third span. And I'm going to make it negative 45 degrees. And so we've created our X here. It's a little bit off because they're not positioned over top of each other, so we actually have to position them so they're in the same space. This third span is about 3 pixels underneath of the first one because the first one is 3 pixels tall. So we need to say margin top on this third span, negative 3 pixels, to pull it up the top 3 pixels so that it's overlapping the other span. And so now we get a perfectly symmetrical X. Look at that. So the user can click this menu and they can see it turn into an X, so they know, oh, if I close this menu, that drawer will close. And we're going to build the drawer here in a minute, but first I want to put a nice transition on this. I don't want it to just pop into an X shape. I want it to actually transition into that shape. So where we selected all the spans, I'm going to say transition, let's say transition transform. So when the transform property changes, we want to transition it over a period of 0.34 seconds instead of just changing abruptly. And we want the speed of that transition to ease in and out so that it's nice and smooth. So it's going to create a nice and smooth transition for us. Look how smooth that is. The only thing I don't like is that the middle span appears immediately when you click off. When you uncheck the box, the middle span appears immediately. And so we actually want to, what we should do is we should rotate it as well. And I'll show you why. Transform, rotate. And let's say this is also a rotate of -45 degrees. And then you'll see when we check this off, watch the middle span, instead of just appearing in place, it'll actually rotate into place, just like the third span. See how that's just rotating into place now? It's kind of mesmerizing. I like it. So there you go. Now we want, when the user clicks this button, we need a drawer that slides out and has our navigation links in it. So let's go through the process of creating that drawer right now. All right, so we have our menu container and our logo container. Right in between those two things, I'm going to create another div. And actually, let's make this an aside. It's a little bit more semantic. We're telling the browser or any bots crawling our site that this is a sidebar. And it's a navigation, so it is kind of a sidebar. And I'm going to create a nav tag inside of here. And that's another semantic element that's going to tell browsers and bots that are crawling our site that this is our navigation. Inside of the nav tag, I like to create an unordered list. And I like to make each link a list item. So this is a link to a page in our site. Let's say it's the About page. And it doesn't have to link anywhere right now. It shouldn't. So we'll just put the pound sign in there. And then if I copy that, I can have a portfolio page, maybe. Portfolio page. And then maybe like a contacts page. Okay, and so what I want to do is I want to take this aside. I'm going to give it the class drawer because it's going to slide in and out of our page like a drawer. And I want to display that drawer absolutely to take it out of the normal flow of the page. And we do that by going down here, and I'm going to select the drawer. I'm going to position it absolutely. This pulls it out of the normal flow of the page, and it puts it on, actually it'll go back to the body of the page. By default, it'll go to the top left of the body of the page. And I don't like having things styled up against the body, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come up to my page wrap rule. I'm going to say position relative. And what that does, it's already positioned relative by default, like most elements. But when we explicitly say position relative, this drawer, what it's going to do is when we position this drawer absolute, it's going to go back to its next container, which is this, and it's going to say, is this explicitly stated as positioned relative? The answer is no. So then it goes back to this container. Is this explicitly stated as relative? The answer is no. And then it'll go back to our page wrap. It'll say, is this explicitly stated as relative? And the answer is yes. We've done that explicitly in our CSS. Okay, so it's going to be positioned to the top left by default of this page wrap, which is what we want. And we want to make sure it's at the top left. We probably don't even need to do this, but I like to be sure. So top 0, left 0, we'll put it at the top left. And then let's give it a width of 0. And then an overflow X of hidden. And so that is going to completely hide the drawer and all of its content to the left of the page. Let's give it a background color of white. And if I change this width to 75%, you can see how there's a little box that pops out here. And I actually want to give it a minimum height as well. Min height. I want the minimum height to be at least as high as the viewport height. So there we go. See how we have what I would call a drawer here. And I'm going to set this back to 0. We want this to slide out when this menu is checked. And the way we're going to do that is very similar to what we did here with these checked states. And what we want to do is get rid of this span. We need to go from the input to the menu container. Okay, we did that. Now we need to go from the menu container to the drawer, which is a sibling of the menu container. So we actually need to add another sibling attribute, or sibling selector, and select the drawer that way. And so now we're styling the drawer, and we want to get rid of this code, and we want to say width is 75% when this input is checked. So there you go. Now we have some problems here. Our links are up high, and we can't see our X. Part of that is because the drawer is covering it, and part of it is because the links would be covering it, even if the drawer wasn't. So let's solve the problem with the links right now. What I want to do is, first of all, what I like to do in projects is toward the top of my page, I'll actually select all unordered lists inside of a nav, and I'll just say list style none to get rid of those bullet points. And I'm going to say padding 0 and margin 0 to get rid of all the default styling. And then for this particular navigation, I want to come into, down here under drawer, I'm going to say drawer, and then I want to style the unordered list inside the drawer. And I want to say padding top, and I'm going to say 80 pixels maybe. I think that's what we'll end up needing. Yeah, that's about right. Also, it's all the way over on the left edge now, and we don't want that either. So I'm going to go into where I have this unordered list, and I'm going to give it that class container that we created earlier. And that's going to serve the same purpose that it did earlier. It'll create some margin there on the left edge. Now, when we click our drawer open, it does open, but it opens very abruptly instead of transitioning open. We can't see our X here, and we can't click it to close our drawer, so now our drawer is stuck open. That's not a good user experience. Also, this drawer looks very flat up against the background here, and I don't like that. So that's the first thing I want to address. I'm going to get that same box shadow that I used earlier, and for the drawer, I'm just going to add a nice box shadow. You can pause it and copy that, or do your own, but now it looks like it's on top of everything. To solve this problem with the menu not appearing, we need to use something called z-index, and I could do an entire tutorial for an hour on z-index, and I'm not going to do that right now, but maybe I can post some information below this video about z-index. But basically what it does is it controls the layering of the elements on your page. And so if we set everything by default has a z-index of 1, I believe. And so if we set this menu that's supposed to be up there, if we set it to a z-index of higher than 1, it should put it as the highest most layer on the page, and we should be able to see our menu button up here. So what I want to do is come up to the menu, and for anything that you're going to use z-index on, you want to explicitly state its position. So it's already positioned relative, but we want to say that explicitly in order to get z-index to work. Now we're going to say z-index 10. We could say z-index 2, but 10 just makes sure that it's on top of everything else. And so if it has a z-index of 10, it's going to be on top of any element that has a z-index of less than 10. And I already said it, by default, all the elements have an index of 1, I believe. And so it works. We can now open and close our drawer. Now it's still very abrupt and it doesn't transition. I actually want it to slide out, and that's why I call it a drawer, because it slides out. So let's do that now. What I want to do is copy this same checked code that we've been using, paste it down below, and instead of, actually, I don't need to do that. What am I thinking? I'm going to come up here to where our drawer is, and I am going to type a new, I'm going to say transition. I want to transition the width over a period of 0.34 seconds again, and I want it to ease in and out. I like to keep my transitions similar and cohesive across all elements so that everything kind of animates and transitions the same way, or at least a similar way, for my whole website. So when I click this, the drawer slides in and out. Isn't that cool? Now I do see an issue here. Our container div is not giving the same amount of margin for our list as it does up here for our menu. And so these things aren't aligned, and that just kind of bugs me a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to adjust this unordered list is where we have the container on. I want to adjust the width of this so that it'll match this X. And this part requires some math that I've already done. And so I don't want to teach a math lesson right now, but basically what's happened here is both of these containers are setting the width to 85% of its container. And so this menu has a width of 85% of the whole viewport. So it's putting 15% of padding split between the two different sides here. This one is also putting 15% of the padding, but the reason it's not equal is because this container is only going 75% of the viewport. So 15% of a smaller element is going to be a smaller amount of, and I'm calling it padding, but it's actually margin. It's a smaller amount of margin because it's in a smaller container. And so what we need to do is make these things equal. And when this has 15% padding, in this we've reduced by a quarter on each side by making it 75% more narrow. We actually need to make up for a full half of this width to add to the margin. And so half of 15%, which is what we have here, is 7.5. And then if you add 7.5 to 15, you get 22.5. So we need 22.5% margin over here. And we do that by setting our unordered list inside the drawer to have a width of 70, I think it's 77.5%. And now we can see that our links here are even with our menu. And that's because we've evened it out with our width here. And so it's okay if you didn't know that math. The other way to do it is to just change this width until you think it lines up. So it's not 50% clearly. So is it 70%? Well, that's actually a little better. And I just know that it's 77. So, oops, not 700, 77%. And so I just like the way that looks. I'm not even going to use the half. I just like the 77. So, okay. Let's see. So, what we want to do now, this is starting to look really good. The only thing I don't like is that I want this list to fade in and out in opacity because I just think it'll look nicer when it transitions. And so I can actually set the opacity to 0. And I want to copy this code, and I want to just select the unordered list inside the drawer when it's checked, and I want to set the opacity to 1. So the opacity will go from 0 to 1 when it's checked. So that's good, that's what we want. But we want to transition that opacity over the length of the animation. So we want to say transition opacity 0.34 seconds, and we want it to ease in and out. Let's try that. It's very subtle, like very, very subtle, but I like it. Okay. What we want to do now is just add some basic styling to these links. And actually up here toward the top where we added that styling for unordered list inside of a nav, right under that I'm going to style all anchor tags that are inside of a nav. And I'm going to say, for those anchor tags, I'm going to say text decoration none. And I'm going to say color can just be the text color we've been using, the 777 number. There you go. So that's already starting to look better, isn't it? And then let's go back down to where our drawer is, though, to finish styling those anchor links, because this is the style that's going to apply specifically to these anchor tags. What is going on with our? Oh, that's funny. Okay, it's just because we've not finished writing our code here. So anyway, so let's style these anchor links inside of our drawer, and let's say font size. I'm going to make it bigger because it's on a phone, and we want to make the targets to click the links a little bigger. Also, to make the targets bigger and easier to click, we can add padding top, and let's just say 1 rem, and then we can add padding bottom and make that 1 rem. And that just makes the targets, like I said, even bigger. And that actually isn't, this is actually, I'm glad I did this. These are inline elements, and so the padding top and bottom don't actually take effect on inline elements. And so what we actually have to do is we have to display these suckers as block. Boom. Now our padding's taken effect. And just for a nice design, I'm going to add border bottom. And I'm going to make the border bottom 1 pixel solid. And I'm going to use this text color. There you go. See how nice that looks? And since we have the border, I actually like when the text is not up against the edges of this little section that we've made for it. And so what I want to do is I just want to add right under padding top, I'm going to add a padding left, and I'm just going to say 1 rem as well. Keep things consistent. I just think that looks nicer when there's a little padding on the sides. And what you can do is you can actually add cool little icons here, and I'll show you on my personal site. Oops. If you actually look at my site, and let's look at the mobile version, you can actually see the icons on the side here. I did a very similar navigation. There's a lot you can do with this drawer once you've created it. And so that's what we've done here, right? And so you could add those icons, and maybe I'll do a tutorial on that. This is done, I think. I think it looks great. You can add more links down here. If you add enough links, I'm going to delete these, but I'll show you. What if we had like a bunch of links there, right? You can actually see how it scrolls, and that reminds me. Let's go ahead and set the scroll Y position for this. I think we said overflow X hidden. Let's do overflow Y scroll. And so if we add a bunch of links, oh, wasn't expecting that. Here, let's set, instead of min height 100 viewport height on the drawer, let's just set its explicit height. There we go. So there you go. Now you can actually scroll, and now we're like getting stuck with the X, so we'll actually have to create more padding and margin here, but you guys get the point. And I'm actually going to reset this to min height, because then it doesn't do that. It'll just create, and I'm going to take away this overflow Y scroll. And so now you can just scroll down the page like that. And so that's just as good. Anyway, I'm going to delete all those extra links. But the point being that this is a flexible layout, and you guys can style it however you want. But here we go. Here's our 3 links. I love the way this has turned out. Hope you guys like it too. I know it's plain, but that's the point. You guys can use this as a template and then go and really go crazy with your own styling here. But I actually don't even mind how plain it looks. I think it looks really clean, and I like clean designs. And I think especially new designers tend to clutter their designs. And staying clean and consistent is probably the hardest thing for a new designer. So I like it. All right, so we actually have to style this sucker on wider screens. And so thank you for bearing with me this far. If you made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back. Maybe pause the video and take a break. But we are coming around to the home, what do they call it? The home stretch. We're about to finish this thing. And we're going to design the layout for wider screens. Because if you look at the wider screen, the navigation just looks super weird. So let's go ahead and dive into that and finish this thing up. So I'm going to create a media query. And I'm going to set the min width to 768 pixels, which is about the size of a tablet. And just to make sure, whenever I create a media query, I test it to see if it's working. And so let's do page wrap, and let's say background black. And so now we know it's working because the background turned black. And right at 768 pixels, these styles are going to take effect. So that's good. That's about the size of a tablet screen. So I'm going to keep it at about 768 pixels. And I'm going to start writing my styles for this screen width right now. And this is going to be a lot of resetting. So the first thing we should do is hide our menu because we don't need it anymore. We're not going to need it. And there's actually a search button over here that we haven't styled, but it's over there. And we want to hide that as well because we don't need that. And I'll show you how to bring the search back. But for now, we're hiding it. And to do that, we'll say display none because we want to completely remove them from the flow of the page. And we actually need the logo to be on the left. And to do that naturally, it would need to be higher up in the HTML document than the drawer, but we don't want to change the HTML. So what we want to do is these are actually flexbox items already. So what we can do is we can say logo container, and we can set the order to 1. And we can say text align. Remember, it's aligned center, so let's align it left. And look at that. Our logo's over on the left. Looks nice. And I know it's a far cry to call this a logo, but like I said, I created a tutorial where I turned this into a logo. And then you can actually see it on my website. So we're doing the same thing here. The logo's over to the left and looks really nice over there. And now what we want to do is we want to reset a lot of the drawer styles because that drawer it's positioned absolutely, it's set off the page. We don't want any of that anymore. So we have to get rid of all that stuff. So we want to position it relatively again instead of absolutely. And this is going to get really wonky over here as we do this. We want to set the min height to initial. If you left it as up here in the drawer, if you left it as height, 100 viewport height, then you need to reset the height as initial. But we left it as min height, so we want to reset the min height as initial. And that'll set it to what it is naturally with before we changed it originally. So it kind of resets it. We want the width, for now I'll leave it at about 50% because I think it's going to take up about 50% of our header. And remember, we set the order of the logo container on 1, but we didn't set the order of the drawer, and we need to do that. We need to set it to 2 so that it comes after the logo. See, now it's coming after the logo. And we need to get rid of this card style, and if we say box shadow none, that'll get rid of that. And yeah, we can't really see anything. So let me get the drawer unordered list, and let's see if we can actually see these links. Let's bring the drawer unordered list to opacity 1. There we go. All right, so now let's go back up to our drawer rule, and I think we want to display this as a flexbox item so that it lays out in a row. And I think we're going to want to justify it as justify content as flex end. Yeah, because we want it to start on the right hand side, just like these links start on the right hand side. Now we need to lay these links out vertically. And I think the nav element, here's what I'll do. Let's set the nav element, the nav inside of the drawer and the UL inside of the drawer. I think they need to have a width of 100%. Starting to look better, I think. Here, let's come back down to our unordered list in our drawer, and let's try displaying these out horizontally using flex. Display flex. Okay, better. Not great, but better. And this is just something that you have to just keep playing with until you can get it reset properly. And so we're going to justify the content flex end, maybe? Yeah, okay. So we're starting to get there. I think there's some weird padding on our unordered list. Remember, we had a padding top in order to make room for the menu button. We don't need that anymore. Let's just take all the padding off of our unordered list. Let's take all the margin off our unordered list in case there's still margin on it. Doesn't look like it. Okay. And it's already set to 100% width. Here, let's, for our links, let's style those now. Let's style our anchor tags. I'm going to reset the padding to just 0.5 rem all around for our anchor tags. Let's take, I was going to say it's border. Yeah, let's say border none. So there's no border on there. And the font is too big on larger screens. We don't need it to be that big on larger screens actually. So we want to set it to like 1 rem. I like the smaller links up here. I think it looks nice. And I think for now that's good. Now I think what we want to do is let's figure out here. I'm going to open up developer tools with Control-Shift-J in Chrome. I'm just going to take a look at what's causing this. We have some severe padding top still. Interesting. Yeah. Drawer, unordered list. It's not liking our padding. We probably just have a typo, to be honest. Yeah, I did padding. You want that to be padding. And there we go. See how much better that looks? Wow. This looks great. Now, you know, you'll see that it is a drawer on smaller screens that you can pop out. There'll be a little search bar here. I actually did it on my site. Let's take a look at the mobile version of my site. See how there's like a search icon there? That's what we would put there. And you know, on larger screens, the search is just a link like all the other links. So that's what we want. So let's say there's a search there. We did put a search box there. It is there. We just need to put the icon in, which we don't need to do for this tutorial. But we do want to search link here. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up, and this is the last thing we're going to do. We are done after this. We have built a navigation, which is pretty incredible. Couldn't have done it without you guys. All right, so let's add a search link. In a way, we're done, right? Because we can just, oh look, we have our search link up there. That's great. The problem, and it's not a big problem, but there's a search link here, and if you open this up, there's another one down here, and that's just redundant. So all you have to do, honestly, is just hide it on smaller screens. So I'm going to select the li tag, and I'm going to give it the class search link, and I just know that on smaller screens, and I'm going to make sure you're outside of your media query, but under this where we selected the anchor tags in the drawer, we want to say drawer, actually we don't have to do that. Let's just say search link. You don't want to be too specific if you don't have to be. So search link, display none, just remove it from the document entirely. And so there you go. It's not there on smaller screens because we're going to have our search icon up there. And it's not on our wider screens because I never showed it again. I bet you guys are confused. Okay, so I must be getting tired after this long tutorial as well. All right, so we actually want to grab it inside of our media query, and we want to display it as, I'm going to say block. There we go. Now we have a search button on wider screens. Pretty cool. So smaller screens have a nice drawer. Looks really good. Really smooth transitions. And then on wider screens we have a nice navigation. Okay, so sorry that was a long one, but I think we got a lot done. And like I said, this is a nice navigation that we've built. You guys can now save this and reuse it, take it and run with it, create different versions. Try to make it look even better. Add those icons like we talked about. If you think the styling's too simple, I like simple, but if you think it's too simple, definitely add some color, and you can add some graphics in there, and you can do a lot with it. So hopefully you guys had fun. This is probably my favorite tutorial so far. I don't know about you. You guys can leave me feedback on the contact section of my site. I check that every day. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and happy coding.